Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Marika van der Steenhoven, and I'm the Special Collections Education and Outreach Librarian, and I'm joined, as usual.
Hello, I'm Kat, I'm the department head here.
So Kat and I are just thrilled to welcome you to our May Audubon page turning event. This is our final page turning for the Bowdoin College Spring 2021 semester. And we want to thank all of you who have joined us either for the first time today or have been with us this whole wild year. It's been a real honor to continue to share the page turning event with you in this digital format. We're going to take a break on public events for the summer, and then we'll come back in the fall, and details about that are forthcoming. So stay tuned. If you have elected to join our mailing list, we will send out information once we have our fall events lined up, but you should feel free to explore our website. There's lots of fun content about Audubon, about our other digital exhibits, as well as some of our digital collections. I'll put a plug in that if you're associated with Bowdoin, if you're an alum, if you're a current student, faculty, or staff, we would love for you to share your story about your experience during this wild year. We have a Documenting Bowdoin and COVID-19 project, and you can submit an interview, an oral history, a journal, or a poem, or you can fill out our very low barrier, easy to fill out survey to share some of your experiences. So we would encourage you to do that. And you can find that on our website, which is library.bowdoin.edu/arch for archives. So we're thrilled to welcome our special guest today. I'm just delighted to welcome Peter Logan back. He has been such a good friend to us in this whole Audubon experience. He has educated me personally, and I know Kat as well, about Bowdoin's specific copy of Audubon's Birds of America. And so we welcomed him to campus several years ago, and we're so thrilled that he's able to join us again today. So let me give you a little bit of context about Peter and all of his amazing accomplishments. Peter Logan graduated from Bowdoin, magna cum laude in 1975. He went on to Georgetown, where he obtained a law degree in 1978. He practiced in California for 40 years, litigating a wide variety of civil lawsuits throughout the state until his retirement 2 years ago. He served as the mayor of Tiburon, California, as well as the president of the Bowdoin Club of San Francisco. For over 20 years, he has sponsored the Logan Environmental Internship at Bowdoin, offering students with an interest in environmental studies the opportunity to spend the summer working with the Maine Nature Conservancy. He is a lifelong birder, as well as being an Audubon scholar, and in 2016 published a major new biography of the naturalist entitled Audubon, America's Greatest Naturalist and His Voyage of Discovery to Labrador. He followed that up with an article detailing Audubon's connection to Bowdoin in the fall 2017 issue of Bowdoin magazine, and recently co-authored an article about Audubon's ornithological biography, which appeared last month in the prestigious Archives of Natural History. We thought he might like to share the benefits of his research on the ornithological biography, and so we invited him back for his second page turning event. Welcome, Peter.
Well, hey, it's a pleasure to be back.
It's
nice
a
to
pleasure.
see both of you.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to see you. And I love our sort of, I guess, I'm not quite sure how frequently it happens, but I keep track of the watermarks on the pages of this copy of Audubon. So it's been a pleasure to kind of continue our correspondence since you were last on campus. I'm going to change my camera over so we can actually all take a look at the Birds of America that we have here in the Special Collections Reading Room on the 3rd floor of the Hawthorne Longfellow Library. And Kat and I are going to flip the bird as we do once a month. So hold tight and we'll take a look at this beautiful image. Ready, Kat? I'm ready. Okay. I just posted to Instagram a behind the scenes photo of our setup here, so you can see the camera and all of that. And what I'm currently doing is climbing over a bunch of wires.
Carefully.
Carefully. So we're
Carefully.
saying goodbye to the loggerhead shrike. And we are saying hello to the hermit thrush.
Ooh, lovely. Careful. Careful. Oh my gosh.
I wish we had another camera on that. So I'm just gonna zoom in a little bit so we can get maybe a better look, and then there we go.
That's good, yeah. Is it focused? I can't
I
tell.
think it is focused. All right. So without further ado, Peter, let's turn it over to you.
All right, let's see if I can share my screen with everybody. Let's see here. What happened? There we go. And we're going to go here. And let's see, now we're going to go here.
And there we have it.
Yep.
Great, perfect. All right, well, let's talk quickly about the hermit thrush. This is one of 5 North American thrushes in the genus Catharus. It can be distinguished from the other members of the group by the contrast between its brownish back and rufous tail. Okay, as you can see from this range map, it's found throughout the United States and much of Canada over the course of the year. It's the first Catharus species to migrate north in the spring, the last to head south in the fall, and the only one that winters in the United States. It has a haunting ethereal song, which I'd love to play for you. Okay. It's very commonly heard in the eastern United States. You should start hearing it about now in Maine. Audubon, however, was evidently unfamiliar with it because he wrote in the Ornithological Biography that it didn't have one, which brings us to the subject of today's talk. The Ornithological Biography, as most of you know, was the 5-volume textual companion to the Prints of the Birds of America. It's long been surpassed by more recent publications, but it was a pioneering work for its time and remains relevant for Audubon's description of bird behavior. Audubon was not an ornithologist. He didn't claim to be one, but he was a serious field naturalist. And he took notes of his observations, and they made their way into the pages of the Ornithological Biography. Robert Cushman Murphy, the longtime Lamont curator of birds at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, remarked over 60 years ago, and I'm quoting, "Many ornithologists have had the experience of making some new discovery in bird behavior, which is proven unknown likewise to their most erudite colleagues, only to find that keen-eyed old Audubon had minutely described the same phenomena 100 years before." The story of the Ornithological Biography is an interesting one, but it's been lost in the shadow cast by the Birds of America. My co-author, Marty Sidor, and I wanted to bring it back into the light. So let's go back to 1826 when Audubon arrived in Liverpool, England at the age of 41, carrying 2 portfolios of upwards of 400 life-size drawings of North American birds. He'd made the voyage in hopes that he could find a publisher, something that America could not offer him. But there was more to it than that. Audubon had an enormous ego, which had been beaten down since virtually everything he owned had been lost in the economic panic of 1819. He wanted to find a way to use his drawings to provide financial security for his family. At the same time, he longed for the respect and admiration that would come with publication of his work. And just as importantly, he aspired to be recognized as the foremost authority on the continent's avifauna. However, at that time, that title belonged to the late Alexander Wilson, a Scottish teacher and poet who immigrated to the United States in 1794, settled in Philadelphia, and developed an interest in ornithology. He subsequently published, whoops, let's go in the wrong direction here. He subsequently published American Ornithology, a 9-volume work issued between 1808 and 1814, which was the first serious look at the subject, and it brought Wilson widespread acclaim. Audubon considered his field knowledge second to none, and he was convinced that the beauty and fidelity of his drawings were far better than Wilson's. This is Wilson's drawing of the now extinct Carolina parakeet from American Ornithology. And this is Audubon's. There's really no comparison. And that's certainly what Audubon thought. However, in 1824, when he traveled all the way from his home in Louisiana to Philadelphia, the center of science and publishing in the US, hoping to gauge the publishing interest in his portfolio, he wrote in his journal, and I'm quoting, "Not only cold water, but ice was poured upon my undertaking." To make matters even worse, the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia, which had many members who had been personal friends of Wilson's and had no desire to see his legacy supplanted by a backwoodsman with a brush, rejected the application for membership that Audubon had submitted. However, there were some in the Philadelphia scientific community who encouraged him, including Richard Harlan, a young Quaker physician and naturalist. And Philadelphia engraver Gideon Fairman recommended that Audubon take his drawings to England, where they could be engraved in a superior manner. So when he arrived in England, Audubon realized that if he was ever going to achieve his goals, he was not only going to have to find a publisher for his drawings, he was also going to have to write a comprehensive text to accompany them. However, combining the two in a single work would have been impractical because Audubon insisted that his drawings be rendered life-sized. More importantly, he learned that under the British Copyright Act, any textual work had to be deposited. 11 copies had to be deposited for donation to various institutional libraries throughout the United Kingdom. We calculated that if Audubon had decided to combine the two, just producing the prints over the course of the project would have cost him $120,000 in today's money. He didn't have the financial resources to do that, so he quickly realized he had to keep them separate. So he didn't really begin to write the first volume until the late fall of 1830, just as his London engraver and printer, Robert Havel Jr., was completing the first volume of 100 prints. Audubon and his wife Lucy Bakewell Audubon traveled to Edinburgh, where they worked on the text with Scottish ornithologist William McGillivray. In individual biographies for each of the species depicted in the prints, Audubon offered details about the bird's behavior, its habitat, its nesting and distribution based largely upon his personal observations. After every 5th biography, Audubon included a personal essay or episode in which he introduced his largely British audience to America and its people, and included several of his often embellished tales of life on the frontier. Audubon was one of our finest nature writers, but English was his second language and he needed a good editor. McGillivray proved to be an ideal one, able to smooth the rough edges from his prose while keeping his original voice. And he also provided scientific descriptions for each of the species in the ornithological biography. Perhaps most importantly, he didn't demand any type of credit for his contributions on the title page. The first volume was issued by the end of March of 1831 in a print run of 750 copies, issued under the imprint of Adam Black, who was an Edinburgh bookseller and publisher and later Lord Provost of the city. However, it was completely self-published at Audubon's expense. At the end of the book, there was a copy of the prospectus for the Birds of America. At the same time, Audubon was working a long distance with his Philadelphia friend and agent, Dr. Richard Harlan, and also another Philadelphia colleague, Dr. Henry McMurtry, to bring out an American edition protected by an American copyright that would prevent unscrupulous publishers from stealing his work. Interestingly, Audubon was not the copyright holder, Harlan was. When Audubon lost everything he owned in 1819, he was briefly jailed for debt and was only released when he filed a petition in bankruptcy. But under Kentucky law, where he lived at the time, he was not discharged from his debts. So he didn't want to hold any assets in the United States. The Philadelphia edition, with minor changes in typography and language, was issued in a print run of 500 copies in late June or early July of 1831. It also included a copy of the prospectus in the rear. While the title page carried the publisher imprint of Judah Dobson and Henry H. Porter, again, this was a self-published work. It cost Audubon about $900, which would be around $28,000 today. Within a few months, Porter began to run into financial difficulties, having overextended himself in his publishing ventures, and he went into bankruptcy in March of 1832. Harlan had been anticipating something like this and wrote to Lucy in January of that year, indicating that he planned to take the 300 copies in his possession, print up a new title page, and then basically release it as a brand new second edition. And that's what he did. He worked with the well-known Philadelphia publishing firm of Edward Carey and Abraham Hart to do that. Former title pages were sliced out and the new ones were tipped in. We confirmed this after consulting with Marika, who shared this image of Bowdoin's copy of the 1832 edition. The title page on the left, as you'll see, is a crisp white compared to the aged page from the first printing that follows. Moreover, you can see, if you look closely at the image, the remnants of the sliced out title page that's sitting in the gutter between the two pages. Bowdoin's copy is also significant because it's bound in the publisher's faded pink cloth with its original leather title label on the spine. Most of these books were rebound over the years, and so this is really quite rare. During our research, we only found one other surviving copy. The second volume had to wait until 1834. Audubon and Lucy had returned to America in September of 1831 so that he could find additional species to draw. Over the next 2.5 years, he traveled as far south as Key West and the Dry Tortugas, and as far north as the Labrador coast along the northern shores of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Here and there, he began writing some of the biographies, but the real work didn't begin in earnest until they returned to England in May of 1834. Havel had already completed the second volume of prints in February of that year. So Audubon spent the summer writing the biographies and the essays and sending them to Edinburgh so that McGillivray could revise them. Then in October, Audubon and Lucy headed for Edinburgh so that they could work on the sheets for the printer. The second volume came out in early December in another edition of 750 copies under the imprint of Adam Black and his nephew Charles, who had recently joined him as a partner. However, Audubon was still concerned about the American copyright, so he enlisted his Boston friend and agent, Dr. George Parkman, to bring out a Boston edition. Parkman worked with the Boston booksellers and publishers Hilliard Gray and Company to bring out an edition of 500 copies in June of 1835. To avoid any lingering Kentucky debts, he had the book copyrighted in the names of his two sons, the eldest, Victor Gifford Audubon, shown here, and the youngest, John Woodhouse Audubon. Unfortunately for sales, 356 of the books were destroyed in a Boston fire later that year. With only 144 copies escaping destruction, this is the rarest of all of the editions. Bowdoin doesn't have a copy, but neither does the Library of Congress. Then the next 3 volumes were printed exclusively in Edinburgh with the assistance of William McGillivray and under the Adam and Charles Black imprint. We're going back in time here. So volume 3, let's see, we talked about volume 2. So now we're up to volume 3. So this came out in Edinburgh the 1st of December of 1835. It contained another group of episodes along with the biographies of those birds that had been showcased in volume 3 of the Birds of America. The evidence indicates that the print run did not exceed 750 copies, 300 of which were sent to America to be sold. Those can be distinguished by the presence of a copyright notice that's pasted onto the half title page of the books. Interestingly, it was taken out in Audubon's name. Evidently, he had finalized the claim and settled it with a former Kentucky creditor and now believed it would be the last. Volume 4 had to wait until Audubon, shown here in 1838, at the age of 53, made one final trip to America so that he could explore the Gulf Coast for new species. He didn't find any, but the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia, which had belatedly reversed its error and made him a member in 1831 and also subscribed to the Birds of America, agreed to sell him the skins of dozens of new species discovered on either side of the Rocky Mountains by Thomas Nuttall, a British botanist and naturalist who had taught at Harvard, and John Kirk Townsend, who was a young Philadelphia ornithologist. Both of them had been attached to the second Wyeth edition that took them across country from St. Louis to the mouth of the Columbia River. When Audubon arrived back in England and began illustrating all of these new Western birds he had in hand, he quickly realized that even though he was putting multiple birds on a sheet, such as this with plate 416, he was going to have more than 100 prints in the last volume. Indeed, when the last print came off Havel's press in June of 1838, there were 135 in that volume. Audubon recognized that there were going to be far too many species to complete the ornithological biography in one volume, so he decided to break it into two. The next 100 species were addressed in volume 4, which came out in November of 1838. Volume 4 did not include the episodes, though. He had not been very happy with the ones in volume 3, saying that they were so-so indeed, and there was no room for them. McGillivray was adding anatomical descriptions of each of the species based on his examination of specimens that had been shipped in alcohol to Great Britain at Audubon's request. So that posed a problem, and they had to cut where they could. Volume 5 finally appeared in May of 1838, presumably in an edition of 750 copies, which is what we thought of the print run for the volume 4 as well. Audubon added some corrections that he'd made along the way. And the thing that's significant about volume 5 is that the title page has an erroneous publication date. It says 1849 instead of 1839. With the completion of the Birds of America, his great work, as he called it, Audubon and Lucy sailed for America in July of 1839. The unsold copies of the Ornithological biography were shipped with them. Initially, they rented a house on White Street in Lower Manhattan, but a couple of years later, Audubon purchased a large undeveloped tract of land in northern Manhattan, which is situated along the banks of the Hudson River in what is now Washington Heights. And there, he had a large home built for the entire Audubon clan, his two sons and their families as well. Lucy had gone without a home since 1819. And this was his gift to her. They affectionately called it Minnie's Land, Minnie being a Scottish endearment that they had picked up when they were living in Scotland. The remaining copies of the Ornithological biography wound up being stored in a barn on the property. There wasn't much of a market for them. They consisted mostly of odd volumes and few, if any, complete sets, which as a consequence had little interest among booksellers and bird enthusiasts. And moreover, within a few months of his return to the United States, Audubon began marketing a small octavo edition of the Birds of America, where he combined both the text of the biographies, not the episodes, and also reduced smaller scale lithographs that were hand colored of the birds in the Havel edition. It was very popular, and unlike the double elephant folio, made Audubon relatively wealthy. In the early 1860s, Lucy, who had buried her husband in 1851 and her sons in 1860 and 1862, was facing serious financial difficulties brought on by John's failed effort to republish a double elephant folio edition, chromolithographed by Julius Behan of New York City. It's now known as the Behan edition of prints. To raise funds, she approached the New York Historical Society to see if they had any interest in purchasing Audubon's original drawings. Her contact at the society was Frederic de Peyster, and in May of 1863, an agreement was reached. The society agreed to purchase 464 of Audubon's original drawings, 430 of which had been engraved for the Birds of America. The agreed upon price was only $4,000, which would be $86,000 today. By contrast, you can't purchase some of the Havel prints for that amount of money. Lucy also tried to sell them the remaining copies of the Ornithological Biography, but at least those that hadn't been nibbled on by rats in the barn, but the society wasn't interested. She evidently tried to obtain some copies of the first volume from English booksellers over the course of that summer and couldn't because they never responded. That indicated to us that the society had no interest because there were no complete sets. However, for whatever reason, they agreed about 6 months later to buy those remaining copies for $1 a piece. We don't really know what they did with them, but they got another deal because Audubon had been selling them for $5.50 a piece when he came back from England. We don't know really, how to identify those specific copies, but what we can say overall is that significantly fewer than 750 sets of the Ornithological Biography were ever sold and are in existence today because of the many odd volumes that remained after they moved from England to the U.S. Bowdoin is really fortunate to have one of these sets, which includes two of the very rare first Philadelphia editions, one of them which came from the library of the Puccinian Society, which was formed at Bowdoin in 1805, and the second, which was donated to the college by David Humphreys Storer of the class of 1822. And as I mentioned, they also have a copy of the second Philadelphia printing. These were really vitally important to us in conducting the research for our article about Audubon's overlooked great work, the Ornithological Biography. And for that, I want to thank Marika, and I want to thank all of you for listening. So I'll take any questions.
Peter, thank you so much. That was just so fascinating. I learned so much, and it was fabulous to see those, how your questions and and the photos were put into context into your talk. So thank you so much for that. We have just a few moments for questions, and one has already come in. Oh, two have come in. The first is from Liz Armstrong, who says, Peter, Audubon was very savvy about legal issues, e.g. the copyright laws in England and bankruptcy laws in Kentucky. Did he figure this out on his own, or did he have a lawyer friend?
He was surrounded by the elite of England. It's a remarkable story, and if you haven't read Audubon's biography, you really should. And there are several out there, including mine. But the reality is, he obtained letters of introduction in America from people he had met at various times. And many of these people knew people in England through business or other contacts. So when he arrived in Liverpool, the first thing he did was just to go around the city and hand out these letters of introduction. That opened up the doors of Liverpool society. And when he wound up in Edinburgh looking for a publisher, again, the same thing. He met all of these well-known people and they had contacts, and they're the ones who really educated him about what he could and really couldn't do in terms of publishing his work.
Amazing. We have a question from Brian who says, "Hi, Peter. Were the original work done in pen and ink with watercolor?"
No, it was not. It was done with pencil. He hand drew everything. He used a grid system, which he developed early on back in the early 1800s when he was just really starting out. And if you take a look at some of his original drawings from that time period and compare them to what he did in, say, the 1820s when he was preparing to go to England, it's just amazing how he developed. And he was essentially a self-taught artist. But he started using various media, ultimately settling on watercolors, providing the best way to illustrate the birds.
Fascinating. I'm curious, do you know of any libraries that have a copy of that rare 1835 Boston edition?
Yeah, that was an enjoyable search because they're not very common, but we located 13 copies in very institutional collections around the country. I'm not going to try to name them all, but there are copies of the American Antiquarian Society, Yale, Harvard have copies, the Massachusetts Historical Society has a copy, Field Museum in Chicago has a copy, and so they are sprinkled around the country.
Fascinating. And if anyone is interested in reading more about the creation of the ornithological biography, what book would you recommend?
Well, I'm partial to my own, but I think that
I am as well.
I think honestly, the best book on the subject is a book called Audubon in Edinburgh. It's written by John Chalmers. It's beautifully illustrated. It covers all of the visits that Audubon made to Edinburgh, which he called his favorite city, and discusses the people that worked with him, including McGillivray and others, that made the Birds of America possible.
Fascinating. Well, unfortunately, we have come up against the 1 o'clock hour. Peter, I want to thank you so much for your fabulous talk today, for sharing your time and your expertise. We will be linking this to our the recording of this talk to our Audubon site. Our Audubon exhibition site shares information about our specific copy of the Birds of America, and there's also citations there to Peter's work. So we would encourage you to check that out and to read his Audubon biography, as well as the article on the ornithological biography that we heard a little bit about here. So thank you, Peter. Thanks to all of you for joining us. It's been such a trip, a delight to share this virtual space with you and to continue to have these incredibly stimulating and fun and thought-provoking conversations grounded in Audubon's Birds of America. I would also be remiss if I did not extend an incredible heartfelt thank you to Tony Sprague, who has been the back end technology support here and has just been fabulous to work with over this past year. And I'm just so grateful for his expertise here. So again, stay tuned to all Special Collections channels here at Bowdoin for information about our upcoming programs this fall. And I hope that you all take good care and be well, and we will see you all soon. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.